Evening.
Evening.
Evening, Albert. Would you like to introduce yourself, Albert, again? I know most people will know you, but just for on sake.
You're not very loud. I'm not hearing you at all clearly.
Sorry, yeah, if you can just introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we get started, if you wouldn't mind, please,
Okay.
sir.
My name's Albert Burgess. Um, Retired French polisher and police officer. Um, who spent many years researching the history and development of English common and constitutional law. So that's me.
Brilliant. And we have, most people should know this if you don't, we have Jezza. Jezza, introduce yourself, please, sir.
Good evening. I am Jezza, one of the custodians of CMW. I've been carrying the torch, if you like, of common law and constitution and Article 61 for possibly the last 10 years. And it's just basically out to help people, make people aware of circumstances.
Brilliant. Yeah, myself. Hopefully, most people don't know me if you tuned in. Yep, been campaigning for many, many years, acting to try and undo many wrongs for more years than I care to admit to. And I would say with honour alongside people such as Albert and Jezza. And well, and I'll say Gary's not here, but hopefully he'll be turning up soon. But yes, it's been a pleasure for all these years, gentlemen. We're still here and still trying to sort this, so that's a good thing. But what we want to talk about tonight, and I know Albert, you'll know a lot about this as well. This is what I wanted you on. Now, sort of like it's all sort of kind of the dust has settled, and everyone's sort of seen what's happened. I want to discuss about Keir Starmer and how he basically told the courts on how they should act in regard to the writers of recent times. I kind of wanted your opinion on that because, like us, you're a common law and constitutionalist. So I thought we'd get your opinion on it because we knew you'd have one.
Well, my opinion is it's illegal. We have the separation of powers between government, the courts, the police, and everybody else, which means I, as a police officer, can uphold the law, but what I can't do is go in the courts and tell them I'm not happy with the sentence they've made or the acquittal they've made, and I want them to go again and until they get a conviction and a sentence that I'm happy with. So I'm not actually, you know, in favour of this government. I think they are overstepping the mark too much, and I think what I find is troublesome is the fact that the courts, when they're told, oh, you've got to treat these people more seriously, you've got to give them longer sentences, I think the court should turn around and say to the government, get stuffed. Our job is to find the people guilty, and if we find them guilty, to work out an appropriate sentence. That's our job. We do not accept instructions as to what that sentence should be from anybody else, and that includes government.
I mean, are you familiar with some of the cases that have actually been brought and sentenced on?
Well, I know that there was a man arrested who was nothing to do with the actual, I'm going to say protest, not riot. He was a man arrested who had nothing whatsoever to do with the actual protest. He was just on his way home and he stopped to look. And he was arrested and charged and I believe sentenced for doing absolutely nothing but standing still on the pavement looking at what was going on. I mean, that is absolutely disgraceful. It's disgraceful from the point of view of the police officer who carried out that arrest and made the charges, because frankly, the man had broken no laws. And you can't invent offences just because you've got a blue pointed hat on your head. And when those offences are placed before the courts, it's the court's job to say to the man with a blue pointed hat on his head, "Get lost! We're not entertaining this. You don't have the right to do this." But in fact, they're not. They're all jumping on the bandwagon. And let's get them. Let's get them. They're right-wing protesters. Let's get them because we've got to kill the right-wing protests.
I mean, in essence,
and suggested to him that if he would like to contact the people who are organising these protests and sit down and have a sensible chat with them, he might even find that he agreed with a lot of what they are protesting about. Because I can't see any reasonable man not agreeing with what they are protesting about.
No, this is the problem. This is the problem. I don't think this government is ready to sit down with anybody or willing to sit down with anybody equal, genuinely.
Yeah, I mean, the Commissioner of Police found 6,000 extra police officers from nowhere to actually go and deal with these protests. In my letter to him, I suggested that if he could find 6,000 police officers to deal with the protests, he could find 6,000 police officers to deal with the knife and gun crime in London and stamp it out in a day. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. The allocation of resources is allocated on a political basis, which it never should be, and the whole thing is just totally wrong.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? This is why I do want to get onto the separation of powers, because I think that is more than relevant for people to understand. But this is the thing: is like some of these cases shouldn't have even been brought to court, but it's because it seems to be guilt by association. But the fact that he overstepped the mark, and the courts, because this is the thing, the courts was quite happy to televise what they did, but it seems to be done in a manner where I would say to create fear rather than to sort of, I don't know, create resolution to something. It was almost like a display. It was almost like a display, like that you see that I would say the alternate powers come together. You see Parliament, the courts, and the press all coming together to sort of say, look, if you're not allowed to be upset and show it.
Well, you're not.
And
the fact that the Metropolitan Police have allocated 900 police officers to troll the internet, in fact, to find out people who don't agree with them or who do different things to them, and go and arrest them and actually charge them with criminal offences. For what? Thinking out aloud? I mean, it's not a criminal offence to think out loud. You don't have a right not to be upset in this country. The fact that we've got all this woke population around, and you say something and it upsets somebody, well, as far as I'm concerned, that's tough. If you can't take it, then turn the bloody internet off. But I mean, it's ridiculous.
This is what I've been trying to explain to people, because people seem to think we're like America, we have the freedom of speech. We do, but it's different. We have the freedom of expression, which our freedom of speech encompasses, and that is, and within that, we have the right to offend.
Well, this is the point.
Like we've said many times before, and you have the right to be offended, but the way you deal with that and you manage that is you remove yourself from that which offends you, because you have the right to do so. What you don't have the right to do is trample on someone else's rights because you are offended.
It's Article 10, isn't it?
I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I posted a story on Revolution online, and I got 2 anti-terrorist police officers in my living room to interview me. And I said to them, why are you wasting my time, your time, and my money paying your wages, sitting here talking to me about a story which is obviously fiction? And they said, oh, well, we've got to do it. And I said, well, okay, let's test your knowledge then. If you find somebody and you actually arrest them before they manage to blow it up, putting on an explosive vest ready to go into a pub on a disco night, what do you charge them under? They said the anti-terrorism laws. And I said, well, what if you've got somebody who's got a British passport who's going to do that? What do you charge them under? They said the anti-terrorism laws. I said, no, you don't, because they got a British passport. You charge them with treason for making war on His Majesty's subjects within the realm. I said, now suppose somebody came over here 11 months ago from Germany. They've been working here under the protection of the King's law, and they've done that, and they decide to blow themselves up, and you catch them first. What do you charge them under? They said the anti-terrorism laws. I said, no, you don't, because they've been living under the protection of the King's law. They have a duty of loyalty to the Crown. Therefore, charge them with treason for making war on Her Majesty's subjects within the realm. I said, now you've come here to talk to me about a fictitious story when you don't even know what your own fucking job is.
Exactly, and this is
you
the thing.
What I mean? It's just ridiculous.
The police oath, the military oath, are all based on 61, and that is all based on the fact of that very thing. You could not wage war on the subjects of the realm.
Well,
it's the highest form of crime.
The modern police oath brought in by Tony Blair is a load of politically correct bloody rubbish. I took the oath that I would uphold the law without fever, favour, malice or ill will. And it's perfectly simple, perfectly straightforward. It means absolutely everything that's said in a new police oath, but it's not politically correct. So, they've made the oath politically correct, and it's wrong. And I mean, I was talking to a police officer the other day who was in royalty protection. He's retired now, he's a friend of mine. And he said that he was glad to get out because basically the officers line up to report other officers for doing things that they don't think they should be doing. Like if you make a remark to a member of the public that they don't think is right, they will go and report you for it. I mean, that is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous that the police force is now fragmented. It's been made totally under the will of the politicians. It's doing exactly what the politicians tell them, and it shouldn't. And it's the same with the courts.
Yeah, this is the thing. We are now seeing a politicised courts and constabulary, or force, whatever we want to call it. And this is where I think a lot of problems are going to lie, where people have to start to realise what's happening now. Because if we don't, it's police by consent. I mean, when you're convicted, the right to the best defence. I mean, you have the right to a lot of things, and this is all being quashed, and these people need to understand this, and this is why we have separation of powers. So, I mean, well, I actually passed it over to you because I usually talk about it, so I'll let you talk about it. But the history of the separation of powers, because if people understand why we have this, I think it'd be better off understood. And
I've listened tonight on the radio a program about Lucy Letby. You know her, don't you? The nurse that was supposed to have killed the 13 babies. And they were saying there that 7 babies died. They were all sent for a post-mortem. And in 6 of the 7 cases, the pathologist decided the babies died of natural causes. But they then went on, because they needed to get evidence against Lucy Letby, they then went on to charge her with murdering those 6 babies, although the pathologist said they weren't murdered. I mean, it's just ridiculous that people are so busy looking over their shoulder, making sure that they are okay, that they're quite happy to pervert the course of justice in somebody else's case.
Well, this is the whole point. This is why we have things like perjury and stuff like that. So I just wanted you to sort of tell the audience a bit about separation of powers and how it come about, if you don't mind. Because I know you're a very, very, very valid historian.
I'm not hearing you at all, Nathan.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I was going to say, if you wouldn't mind, can you tell the audience a bit about, because I'm going to pass it over to you, because I usually talk about it, and I'm sick of hearing my voice, but if you can talk to the audience and tell them a little about the separation of powers, sort of like
Well,
the
yeah,
history
I
of it,
mean,
the origin of the separation of powers, so
yeah,
they
I mean,
get an understanding.
the courts are independent of government. Government pass laws on various crimes, but the courts are independent of government. And that's why we have juries who are also independent of government. Um, so the evidence is placed before a jury. If they then find the person guilty, then the courts will then give what they believe to be the most appropriate sentence. Now, that could be a slap on the wrist, it could be life imprisonment, depending upon the offence. But the courts will decide what they believe to be the most appropriate sentence for the case. But now we have government coming along and saying, here is a group of people that we don't agree with because they don't agree with us. We have this group of people who are protesting what we are doing to the country, and we don't like that idea. So we're going to tell the courts that when we arrest those people, we're going to tell the police to arrest them and charge them, and then the courts are then going to impose a much heavier sentence than the actual offence deserves. I mean, that is completely wrong. It's completely contrary to the separation of powers. It's constitutionally illegal. It's illegal under our common law. And in fact, it's illegal whichever way you look at it. And yet governments are doing it. Police are lining up to do what they are told, and the courts are doing the same.
Well, this is the thing.
I mean, what we're living under now is basically a communist regime where government decide what happens, and everybody just jumps to attention and says, yes, sir, no, sir, free bags full, sir.
Well, yeah, I mean, little people would know, but there was, I'm not sure, I've got to chase it up, but there was a bill that all MPs have personal bodyguard protection. And they try to bring it about to make it an offence to basically criticise any MP. So if you disagree and you say it in any way that may upset the MP, then you can actually it could be classed as an offence. It's becoming ridiculous that it is getting to that point where the government will do what they want to do. You will say nothing, or you will be punished. And I think that's what we see. I mean, how many times has anybody in their lifetime seen I'd say the publicity and how publicly it was actually televised about the sentencing and of them people that was involved in that car.
I mean, if you look at what government are doing today, now Rachel Reeves has come out and said we have a £22 billion black hole in the economy, so we're going to have to get that money back. So the first thing they do is they attack the vulnerable, the pensioners, and they stop their heating allowance and everything else. They've stopped mine. They stop your heating allowance and everything else. And yet when you look at it as somebody else did, they looked at it, 11 billion of those £20 billion was from government expenditure on things like foreign aid. Who do we look after first, our own people or foreigners? We should look after our own people first. But because they want to give money away, they're penalising the weakest people in society, the most vulnerable people in society.
It's a doctrine, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the point. I mean, you can't trust government. There's no such thing as an honest government. I said to the two anti-terrorism officers, would I like to see somebody go into Parliament and shoot the lot of them? Yes, I would. Is that my preferred method? No, it isn't. My preferred method is if you lot got off your backsides, went into Parliament and arrested the whole bloody lot for corruption and prosecuted them. Because they are corrupt, and it's provably they are corrupt.
I mean, this is
the expenses claims were corrupt. Yet Parliament the police didn't want to arrest anybody for fiddling the expenses. If you fiddle the expenses where you work, your governor would sack you straight away. He'd give you the sack, and there's nothing you can do about it because you're guilty of gross misconduct.
I mean, I am hopeful that Sank is going to start to move on this thing, and we can actually start getting the people to actually come together to get a prosecution. I mean, so we had success with the one with Sadiq Khan and Starmer. That can be built on and widened. But people need to understand this, that you do actually have to take part in this. It's not a case of somebody else to do it.
Well, I mean, the point is, when you're talking about prosecuting government, that takes a lot of money. So you're going to have to crowdfund that. And it doesn't matter how much money you crowdfund, government are just going to spend the tax money to defend it. And if they run out of tax money, they're just going to put the taxes up. So you can't actually fight government on a level playing field because you can't keep up with their expenditure.
This is why we don't do it legally. This is why I've always advocated 61, because once the country's been taken, basically the reins have been given to somebody, a group of people that's not corrupt, they're actually answerable to the people until this is sorted. Then we have a chance of actually getting that prosecution done properly. But this is where people need to understand there is a due process involved of how you prosecute these people.
Yeah, but I mean, basically, what we actually need is we need a good police force that understands its job. And if they understand their job, they will know that parliamentarians are corrupt and they will investigate them. And when they investigate them, they will find the evidence there to support the charges, and they will arrest and charge them, and they'll go to court. And if the courts were doing the job their way they ought to, they'd sentence them to a reasonably decent sentence. But that's not happening. That is not happening. I've reached a stage now where I honestly believe the only way out of this is a full-blown armed rebellion. That's my honest opinion. And, I can't, whichever way I look at it, I can't see any other way around it. Englishmen need to take their country back by force if necessary. And, it's going to put you at war against government.
I'm hoping that but I'm hoping if there has been resolutions in the past, I don't like to use the words, but done by way of threat of, rather than actual full-on rebellion.
Well, no, I mean, the fact of the matter is, a few years back, there were 3 armed policemen outside the House of Parliament, and somebody went up to them and said, if you saw 10,000 Englishmen walking down the road with the intention of going into Parliament and throwing every politician out, would you shoot them? And 2 of them immediately said no. No, they wouldn't. There's good reasons for that. Firstly, they don't have 10,000 bullets, so sooner or later they're going to get overrun, and they're going to end up dead, aren't they? The third one kept quiet, and the other 2 apparently looked at him as though to say, well, you're the first one we shoot. I think that the ordinary rank and file policeman is as sick to death of this as you and I are. I mean, I have friends who've been in the police force who've told me that they're just marking the time till they can get their pension. My friend who's just retired a couple of months ago, he told me after 30 years of service that he couldn't get away quick enough because, it's just not the job it was that he joined 30 years ago.
Sorry, Jezza. Yeah, Jezza. No, maybe not. Hello, Jezza. Well, we'll have to wait for Jezza. Still no Gary. But this is the thing. This is I don't. Well, I know for damn fact. You know for damn fact. We've been doing it for too many years now. the whole begging or pleading or asking or showing these people certain rules and go, this is what you're meant to be doing. It's not going to happen. We are going to have to do it. And I would say it can be done without bloodshed. It's been done before without bloodshed. But the way it has to be done, if there's not going to be any bloodshed, is the people have to unite. So we're going to have to put aside our petty squabbles. We're going to have to just sort of say we can put that on the back burner. You can have all your petty squabbles after. Just for now, until the future for our generations to come has been secured and they have the freedoms they're meant to have. I say we put everything aside and we just start getting this done, and once it's done, we can go back to bickering with each other.
You and I know, Nigel, know that there are a number of groups around the country that are going, which very broadly believe the same things that we do. But when you talk about them getting together and joining up together, everybody wants to run their own little thing. And nobody will say, well, the greater good demands that I give up my job and join my party with this lot over here and let somebody on that side run the whole thing. I'll do my best to support them. But they won't do that because everybody wants to be their own boss. It's just ridiculous. It makes no sense whatsoever. But what you've got is
yeah, but this is the beauty about 61 because it's none of us that run any groups. It's none of these people that have like a whole movement that follows them, anything like that. It all goes over to the barons. So basically, we are under the orders of the barons. But it does mean everybody can keep their groups. They can keep their position because all the groups who work together cohesively will be because we take their orders. So if it is the fact we have to, I don't know, for instance, take a royal estate, then one group who all get on with each other is going to be better than trying to fragment that to do anything else. So like I said, to everybody will be able to keep their place. They just will be under
a few years ago, Nathan.
It's the fairest way of doing it.
A few years ago, there was a group of ex-soldiers, and they were being run by a man who had been a corporal in the army, and they were talking about how they take the country back. And somebody said, where do we get the money to buy the weapons to take the country back? And somebody else there said, what are you talking about, money? We're all highly trained soldiers. We all know where the weapons are kept. We all know that we can just go in and get them. And then what happened was that the government invited the corporal along to Parliament to talk to them. And the next thing you know, the government have given him a fancy bloody job and a fancy title and a fancy amount of money. And what is he doing? He's given up the thing and the whole thing has fallen flat on its face. And it's...
This is why, as you know, 61 and the whole process, our security clause.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just so
it has to come from the people, and this is what people need to grasp.
Yeah, it does.
Like, we don't rely on these institutions. We have to start doing this ourselves.
No, the whole thing is just so corrupt, it's untrue. But the people do have the power. The people can make a difference. Many years ago, I knew a lady, and every time she went home, they had her sectioned. And she'd be dragged out kicking and screaming. There was actually nothing wrong with her. But she'd be dragged out kicking and screaming, thrown into an ambulance, dragged off for 2 weeks. The hospital would release her. She'd come back again. And no sooner had her feet hit the ground than she'd be sectioned again and dragged out again. And this went on for about 2 months. And then one day the police car arrived to pick her up. And the public went there. And there was an ambulance there as well. And the public turned out, all the men in the street turned out, and they went up to the police officer and said, it's fortuitous that we have an ambulance here. Because if you touch that girl, if you don't leave her alone, you are going to need the ambulance to take you to the hospital. And the police simply got back in their police car and drove off. And the girl stayed there for the rest of time. The local public putting down their foot and saying, no, enough is enough. You're not doing this anymore. They were able to change what the police were doing and the authorities were doing. But it needs people to stand together. And in the case of
and
government,
it
it-
needs to be on a bigger scale. So not in our
case
just
of
our
government,
communities.
in the case of government, it needs the whole country, every Englishman in the country, to stand together.
Yeah, not just in your own little communities, your own causes. All these causes have to come together because once people realise that when we all come together to deal with the one problem, because it's the same problem we're facing from the same source. So if we
Yeah.
deal with the source together, all of our problems combined then diminish because we're dealing with the problem. But we've got to learn to unite all causes to deal with the common enemy.
Let's imagine, Nathan, that we all went in, thousands and thousands of us went into the House of Parliament and threw the lot over the balcony into the river. And we then said, right, we now need a government. So of the people who were there, we elected temporarily a cabinet and members of Parliament for each area. And we start off with Parliament with a completely new lot of people who have the right ideas, the right intentions.
Exactly. Clean hands, I would say.
History proves it takes about 400 years for those people who had the right ideas, the right intentions, to be replaced by people who want to get rich for nothing at other people's expense. So we have a revolution roughly every 400 years. Now, King Charles could stop all this nonsense. King Charles could just say to the judges, what are you playing at? You don't do what governments say. You administer my law, and I want you to administer it properly and fairly.
There's a thing, he can't get involved in politics, but he can get involved in the court.
That's actually not true. Like that, it's not true. That King Charles can, if he wants to, originate a bill and put it through Parliament. He can do that.
True, yes,
but the fact
it's not
is
common.
No, of course it's not common. But the fact of the matter is, if he said to the judges, I'm not happy with you doing what government tell you, you will uphold the law the way it is written, and you will not take instructions from government as to how you sentence people. Then the judges
he can't be an overarching power within Parliament.
Well, he can because it's his law. It's his law. So he can say that. The trouble is, King Charles is so bloody woke, he never will say it. And he is a major part of the problem because he is so far up. You know, he's been totally brainwashed on global warming and everything else, that he's not even capable of thinking for himself anymore.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I'm quite hopeful because, I mean, we go back a long way, but I mean, if you remember when I first started this, the only groups about really that we talk about the Constitution were sort of like the Magna Carta Society, a little bit, British Constitution group.
Yeah.
I believe there was us and maybe one other group. I think, one or two other groups. Literally, it was unheard of, and now we've actually got people who are actually talking about the Constitution, it being widely known. So I am hopeful, but people have got to understand it is the Constitution that is the actual solution to all this. Once you understand the Constitution and they are held to it, and that's where again the people come in because it's the people's duty to hold them to the Constitution.
Well, if you remember, Nathan, it was me that started talking about the word treason over the paperwork, FCO 1048. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I was the first one to mention the word treason. Now everybody and their uncle mentions treason. But when you actually look at what they're calling treason, they don't have the faintest idea of what treason actually is.
It was actually you that put me onto that document. Like I said, if you remember,
absolutely.
I had a lot of questions back then. Like I said, you helped me with a lot. But this is the thing. This is what I still push that today, actually. But that's another document that people need to understand. This is where our Constitution comes in. It's treason. It's constitutionally repugnant. It should never happen.
It is. I mean, common law has its own treasons. Definitions of treason. when I said that the government were guilty of treason at common law, Brian Garish went online and he slandered me something atrociously. And you know, had I had the money to sue him, I could have taken him for everything he owed. But basically, I wouldn't bother suing him anyway because I don't think he's worth the effort. But the fact of the matter is that if we repealed every single treason law, we would still have treason at common law. You can't get rid of treason. You know, it is a crime that's built into our very genetics. It's in our genes.
It's the most heinous of crimes.
It is, and it's in
As
our
they say,
genes.
treason on one man is treason on a nation.
The only crime that Anglo-Saxon England had the death penalty for was treason. They didn't have a death penalty for murder. You know, you got fined if you murdered somebody, depending upon their status in society, depending upon the amount you were fined. But the only crime for which they had a death sentence was treason, because you know when you talk about treason.
Albert, 2 seconds. I need to just say goodnight to our mod, Lola. Lovely Lola. She's going to bed. So, night. Take it. I'll speak to you in a bit.
When you talk about treason, you're talking about the murder of a country, aren't you? You know, it's not the murder of an individual, it's the murder of a country.
That's where you get the whole thing, isn't it? Treason upon one man is the treason upon a nation, because what you allow to happen to one man, you're allowing to happen to all.
Yeah, and that's why we have the separation of powers, and it's why we have to insist that the courts and the police stick to the separation of powers, and that tells them what they can and can't do. But at the moment, I mean, I'm absolutely appalled at our police force. I see films on the internet, and I know that you don't see the beginning of what happened on the internet, so that tends to be a little bit biased. You know, if you see a policeman punch a man in the mouth, you think, oh God, he shouldn't be doing that. But the fact that the man's just punched a policeman in the mouth is not on the film, is it? Do you know what I mean? So it's biased. But when you see police officers today, I mean, what they are doing, it is wrong. It's overkill. I never, in all my time in the police force, I never ever once, even when dealing with violent people, considered drawing my truncheon. I never once even considered it. And yet now, if you see one of these protest marches, every other policeman's got his truncheon out over his shoulder ready to hit somebody.
I think a lot of that, though, is down to how much society has changed in its base morals, really, I'd say. We're no longer, I would say, a society that base our communities on morals. It's more about
I think what's happening now, Nathan, is we're getting such large numbers of immigrants in the country that they are changing the way that government see us. You know, if you look at the Islamic rape
there is protected demographics that's now being openly and widely admitted.
If you look at the Islamic rape gangs, Gordon Brown, I believe, told all the chief officers of police, don't bother investigating this because these girls know what they're doing and they want to do it. So don't bother looking at it. Now, if he said that to me, Gordon Brown was faced with hit a cell wall because he's obstructing my duty to detect the offences of the rape and prostitution of these girls, and that's a criminal offence. But the fact of the matter is, the police listened to him, and as a result, a considerable number, not a couple of hundred, but several thousand schoolgirls were actually subjected to rape and prostitution against their will. Now, every police officer in the country knows that it's rape if you sleep with a girl under the age of consent. And yet Gordon Brown was saying to these police officers, we've got 11-year-old girls here being raped and prostituted but don't worry about it because it's what they want to do. And yet the law says they can't give consent to what they want to do. They're not allowed to give consent to what they want to do. So the police should have ignored Brown and gone ahead and done their job and protected all those girls and thrown all those rapists in jail, and then the court should have thrown them out of the country.
I mean, this is the problem. I mean, a rough estimate. I mean, clearly what needs to be done. And when we've got constables now, basically that are trained in university, really, if we're honest, that's where they're kind of recruiting from. So how do we get back to teaching and the understanding of how a constable, not an officer, but a constable must act, and the knowledge he must have?
Well, I always just tell everybody, particularly lawyers, that your average policeman carries more law in his head than your average lawyer. Because if you take a case to a lawyer, the first thing he does is he looks in a book to find out what's going on. A police officer can't look in a book. He's got it there. It's in front of him. He has to know what law is being broken, and he has to know what he can do about it and what he should do about it. He has to have that in the top of his head. And you can't be a policeman and decide, well, I'm only going to be dealing with sort of parking tickets, because you walk round the corner and find yourself involved in a murder inquiry or an arson attempt, and you don't know what you're going to get as a police officer. So you have to have an extensive knowledge of the law. Every police officer in the country, you do your 6 months at the training school, and then you do what they call continuation training, where 1 day a month you go into a classroom and you are brought up to date in the latest changes to the law and the latest things that are going on and the latest police equipment that's available to you.
I mean, that is basically what still happens. The problem is they're not so much taught, I would say, law. They're taught. I mean, they're secondary obligations of statute. That seems to be well and truly taught to its full extent. But when you're talking about actually teaching law, for instance, I was talking to a constable about the Criminal Law Act of 1967, and he was familiar with all the kind of the end parts of it that are to do with statutory obligations. But when it came down to the parts of it was actually about law, and it is common, based in common law. Our constitution, I mean, it shows how relevant it is. He was unfamiliar, but when it come down to sort of like I said, the parts that was relevant to his statutory obligations, he was quite well fluent. I think that is the problem. They're not really taught law. They're taught how to fulfil Parliament's requirements, not the requirements of how you govern.
The problem is, Nathan, that the police force now spend more time learning how to be politically correct than they do studying the law. And what their actual authority is. I don't like the word powers. People talk about police powers. A police officer has authority under the law to uphold the law. But I mean, basically,
and we are policed by consent, and that is the big thing. We are policed by consent.
I think the majority. That's the consent of the majority. You can't have somebody drink driving and they say, "Well, I don't consent to the drink drive laws." That is
that's the whole point. That's why
the majority of people consent to the drink drive laws.
It's how it states. It states exactly that. It can be given the force or by the consent of the government.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact of the matter is, the police force has lost its way. It's spending so much time learning how to be politically correct and how not to upset ethnic minorities. Doesn't matter the fact that ethnic minority is standing there with a bloody saber in his hand, threatening to cut everybody's head off in sight. You mustn't upset him, because he has rights and all the rest of it. So, I mean, basically, the police force has lost the plot. They've forgotten what their bloody job is, and they've forgotten how to do their job. I mean, I'm an old style copper, Dixon Dock Green mode, and I'm an old style copper, and I'm proud of that. I always did my job. I never even contemplated drawing my truncheon to beat somebody's senseless with it. Never even contemplated, never crossed my mind to draw it, and no matter what I was doing.
That was a
And
different time. As I said, society is
yeah,
changed. There
but you
was
see,
the knowledge in society back then in the communities that
yeah,
this is
but you see, the police force went wrong when they started insisting on university degrees.
yeah.
You know, you can't be a police officer today unless you've got a university degree. You know, it can be
I,
a complete
I,
rubbish.
I've spoke to constables with their degrees in law and stuff like that.
Yeah,
They are. I'm not being funny, but and I don't
the,
mean to
the,
anyway down, but they are quite really. They're completely deficient.
listen, Nathan, a police
They're
officer doesn't even
they are
need.
literally relatively clueless about the majority of law. I mean, you can't
Yeah,
even mention the spirit of law because most of them
a
don't even
police officer
understand the
doesn't
concept.
need. A police officer doesn't actually need to learn to know how to read and bloody write. What he has to do is have foot tons of common sense, because that's what his job is about. It's common sense, how you deal with people, how you
Well,
deal with situations. You
it's a
know,
fact of harm, isn't it? Majority
yeah.
of
I
it is
mean,
a
you can always
fact
get
of harm.
somebody else to write it down for you if you have to, but basically, it's common sense, and you know, it's. But nowadays, the police force is so heavily engrossed in being politically correct. They're so heavily engrossed in looking at one another with regard to reporting one another for being politically incorrect, you know, that they've forgotten what their actual job is. You know, you can't have an effective police force if every officer in that police force is looking over his shoulder to see if his mate's going to report him, you know, because he swore at somebody who was being violent. You know, I mean, it's rubbish. I mean, it 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 it's just a nonsense. Police officers have to be able to rely entirely on the people they work with. Their lives depend upon it on occasion, so they
Mm.
have to be able to rely on them. And at the moment, in the police force, they can't.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I do think some as well is I think the police have taken it a tad too far on that. I mean, I do believe what you like you say that they need to rely on each other, but I do think they've kind of taken it to the paramilitary level to the point where it's kind of it seems
Well,
offensive to the
this,
ordinary Joe on the street.
this is the whole point, isn't it? They don't even look like police officers today. Um, and you know, if I had the job of being in charge of every police force in the country, the first thing I would do is I would put them back into the full uniform with the tunic, the nice trousers, the nice tunic, you know, and put them back as to what they were 40 years ago, because the police 40 years ago were respected. And nowadays, you see a policeman walk down the street, you don't recognize him as a policeman, you recognize him as the enemy because of the way he is dressed,
Well, that's
you
exactly
know?
it. That's what I'm saying. They are dressed offensively. I mean,
Yeah.
I actually said this to a constable, and he kind of chuckled after he put his thing because he sort of realised I was like, imagine you sort of driving down in your car and you see me and a group of friends all dressed up like you are, sort of like with vests on, sort of all dressed in black, sort of like with ski masks on and boots and that lot. What would you do? And he said, I'd pull you over. I said, yeah, but what happens then when you find out actually we've just been paintballing? And it's completely innocent. He was like, well, it'd be that. I said, but yeah, but what you would think, wasn't it? I mean, you would automatically made that assumption. So what do you
But
think about people? I said, what do you think about people who think about you? So when you're all dressed up and you're looking at in your paramilitary gear, you don't exactly look like approachable. So that's what I mean. This is why I keep still doing it. I'm still doing it to say campaign to get constables back into their appropriate dress because
yeah,
that was an approachable dress. So with
yeah.
the hat and the coat and like you say the trousers, the shoes, that you was able to approach because it gave
You
their
see that
approachability.
the problem is, Nathan, the police force today, the government are saying to the police force, we're giving you all this protective gear. We're giving you CS sprays. We're giving you guns. That's because we're concerned that the public will harm you. Now, your average member of the public has got no intention whatsoever of committing any harm against anybody, let alone a policeman. So the police force go out on the street dressed up in all this gear, and they don't trust the general public not to harm them, and because they've now broken the trust between the public and the police, and
It's going to have a
government's
psychological.
doing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of constables are actually, well, a lot of police are actually up in arms. Apparently, there was a massive survey done in Kent, and I think the general consensus were they felt that they was being put between Parliament and the people. And
Yeah,
it is true to
I
an
mean,
extent, and this is what people don't understand. It's like with the dress code. 2 seconds with the dress code.
you
When you
don't
think
need
about
all.
it, it has a psychological effect on both sides, doesn't it? Because when you dress constables up like that, they are going to have that kind of paramilitary mind. Where
Yeah,
okay, so it's like anybody can harm me, so I've got to be on alert and be like that. So it is mistrust. And then you've got the view of the people,
so
where
you
it's a
already
case of
hit them
they're already
first.
offensive. Yeah, and
Yeah,
then you've
you
got the view
already
of the
hit them
people.
first. I mean, you don't need all this gear. I mean, I took a knife, a 12-inch carving knife, off a 6'3" Abyssinian who was determined to gut everybody with it, me included. I took the knife off him. I had him arrested, and I was just wearing an ordinary, everyday police uniform. No body armor, no nothing, no CS gas, no taser, just my normal gear: a pair of handcuffs, a radio, and a stick in my pocket. You know, and basically, you don't need all this crap. What you need to do is to be well trained in how to deal with situations. And from what I can see of it, they're not trained
De-escalation.
anymore.
De-escalation. I don't think. I mean, I think they're trained in it, but I don't think it's the part. Well, I'd say it's a very small part of the curriculum when it should be a massive part, because most constables don't really de-escalate, or they're not capable of it. I don't know.
But I mean, basically, the best weapon a police officer has is his tongue. That's the point. The best weapon a police officer has is tongue. You can talk somebody down, no matter how violent they are. You can, if you know what you're doing, you can talk them down. You don't need all this gear. You really don't.
This is the thing, isn't it?
Uh,
I mean, their training. I mean, is it a case of all constables and the whole train of constables are going to have to be completely overhauled? Because
well,
I think so. I've been, like I said, that you know this. I've been campaigning. I've been like to every. Half the reason why we kept going to Scotland Yard and we kept doing what we was doing is because we want the constables trained properly. Because then they'll be doing their job properly within the communities, and then hopefully the bridge between the constables and the people can be bridged once again, and that way trust can be gained, and hopefully we'll have safer communities. Until that happens, I don't think it will.
every single police officer in this country needs to be retrained in the old methods. So you need to bring back retired police officers who know what they're doing and get them to teach the younger officers who are still serving how to do the job properly and without causing grief. You need to get rid of political correctness in the police force. It has no place in the police force.
I think that's what it is. I mean, this is the thing. Again, we come back to the separation of powers between law and politics.
Yeah. But I mean, these are things that the police could organise themselves. The chief constables could say to government, no, I'm not doing that. I mean, there was a chief constable a couple of months ago who turned around and said, look, I'm not employing people with university degrees anymore. You really don't need a university degree to be a constable. So I'm going back to basics. Now, he's what we need in charge of every police force. Do you know what I mean?
Well, this is the
He
thing.
should be the man in charge of every police force.
Well, this is the thing. We need to get to the point where constables are actually, I would say, many times, like I have to every constable understand, they need to be constitutionally able. They need to understand common law, and more importantly, how their oath of office and their position in office interacts with the community.
They should certainly be taught about common law and about constitutional law. The only common law police officers are taught about is breach of the peace. And they're taught about breach of the peace, but they will never ever make an arrest for breach of the peace. And the reason for that is that if you arrest somebody for a breach of the peace, your entire purpose in life is to prevent breaches of peace. So if they've committed a breach of the peace, you haven't done your job in preventing it. Therefore, you arrest them for a breach of the peace, and on the back of that, you get reported for neglecting your duty to prevent that breach of the peace. So you're then up in front of a discipline board. So police officers are taught about breach of the peace, but they are never ever going to use breach of the peace. They use the Public Order Act now.
Yep. Get out for.
I mean, when I joined the police, I was told you are a police officer now. People will abuse you. They'll physically, verbally abuse you. But because you are a police officer, you are a man of more than normal firmness. So you ignore that. And yet, when I was serving at King's Cross, the Public Order Act was in, and 2 police officers, we heard, a bloke had sworn at 2 police officers, and they'd arrested him under Section 4 of the Public Order Act. Now, that every police officer in my police station was actually aghast at that. They couldn't believe that these officers had done it. And when they got back to the custody sergeant, they couldn't believe that the custody sergeant had actually put the charges through. They just couldn't believe it. Now, every police officer in the country, if you swear at him, will arrest you under the Public Order Act. What happens to that? What does that mean about being having a firmer character than the average man? You're bringing the level down all the time, aren't you?
So yeah. I mean, as you say, you're meant to be firm of character. So, for the simple fact that we've spoke about this before. I was in court for once for and part of the charges where I basically said the word FUCK. It was actually in the private evidence, but as I pointed out, and as the judge ruled, I think he said I set a precedent in what I said, because exclaiming an abbreviation in a public place is not a crime. Because I didn't understand too much of what he was saying at the time, but he went into the whole point of freedom of expression. And the fact that it's not it can't be an offence if it's an abbreviation, especially when what it means, which is for an account of one of the king. But this is the thing: constables today, where they are politically trained, and I'm going to say trained because I think that's correct wording.
Well, they shouldn't be politically trained. They should be trained in the exact opposite.
Well, this is the thing. It absolutely destroyed the police force, and I do actually think it's been done by design. Personally, I really do.
Oh, of course it has. Of course it has. Just like the courts, you appoint, the government appoint the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice is going to be somebody that government can rely upon to do what the government want him to do.
But this is the thing. I mean, because I have in the long time I've been doing this in the courts and dealing with constables, so that there is genuine people in the police force that did actually get into it because they want to do the right thing. I mean, they thought it would be a noble profession that they could be proud of. There is good people in there, but they are few and far between. Unfortunately, most of them are very politicised, and they just, like you said, there is a lot of backbiting that they police themselves to the point of they get rewarded for grasping on each other. Literally, that is the truth. So, and because that was started to get all the old constables out. So basically, all the old constables who used to do the job properly, who would keep harmony in the community, basically there was an initiative done many years ago to actually start to drive them constables out. And it still happens today, but it's in overdrive today to the point where if you do not do exactly as you're told, when you're told, how you're told, you're weaned out. I mean,
I mean,
I'm not going to say it, but there was actually not that long ago in our history there was actually I would say a unit. But there's definitely an organisation that was built on that sort of same precept.
I don't know. The whole system needs relooking at. But the courts literally should not listen to government about how they should sentence people. That's purely the business of the courts. And I mean, basically, they shouldn't do it. I mean, I personally feel that the only people who sit on a jury in our court should be natural born Englishmen. I personally feel that because
This is the thing.
I personally don't trust the foreigners to give a proper result. I mean, I work with foreign police officers. If you're an Asian police officer, you hate West Indians. So if you're sat on a jury and you're an Asian and you're trying a West Indian, the chances are you're going to want to find him guilty because you
Well,
hate
yeah,
them.
that's a generalisation. But this is the
Yeah,
thing. The unfortunate thing is we don't have jury trials for the majority of people like it should be. They just don't do it. So this is the
no,
problem with the judiciary.
and
This is where the separation of powers comes in again, because
yeah,
we have the right to a jury trial. Then you've got to ask the
yeah.
question: why are we not getting the jury trials?
Well,
I
you
mean,
can
why do you
demand
think
it.
they're not?
You can
People
demand
do
it.
demand. Yeah, people do demand it, but they don't get it.
Well, they can demand it, and if they don't get it, they appeal the decision, and go to a court of appeal over it. You know, I mean, government come up with all these rules. I mean, magistrates, for example, don't have a jury. There is no jury in a magistrates,
No,
but
no.
magistrates only deal with minor offences.
Yeah.
You
Plus,
know,
you
they
have the
don't deal
automatic
with.
right to appeal. You have. It doesn't matter what anyone says. You have the automatic right to appeal any magistrate's decision.
Oh, absolutely, and you know, if you go to a magistrates court and you're charged with an offence, you can say to the magistrate, "Look, I don't accept your court's authority. I want to go to the Crown Court," and the magistrate will just rubber stamp you through to the Crown Court. You know, the magistrate doesn't have the right not to send you to the Crown Court if that's where you want to go. So, you know, you can do that, and but people don't know what their rights are. Juries don't know about jury nullification of an offence.
Ah, I
You
want
know,
to do. I want to do a whole show about this jury notification.
yeah. But I mean, jury
Obviously, we ain't gonna have time
nullification.
tonight.
No. But if you have, for example, a jury that comes in and they're dealing with a case, say, of a serious assault, um, if they decide that they're going to nullify the law on that particular case, then that only applies to that one court case. It does not nullify the law on assault for every other court case. You know, it only applies to that one court case between them. And I mean, I've been in a court where the jury, 14 police officers gave evidence against a woman. The Metropolitan Police and the fire brigade people gave evidence. Forensic people gave evidence against her. She stood in the dock and admitted what she had done, and the jury found her not guilty. They
I,
nullified the law on arson with intent to endanger life in her case.
I do believe though jury nullification has on times, even though it's few and far between, but jury nullification has on times actually got rid of a lot of statutes. Or should
Well,
I say,
I'm
acts of Parliament due to the fact of it was proven to be unlawful in itself
well,
or constitutionally
if
repugnant.
you can prove that the law, in fact, is unlawful, then obviously it should go. But for the vast majority of cases, the law is there, it's there, and it's perfectly clear. The offence is there, it's perfectly clear. And if the jury then decide to nullify it, then that is for only that one case. It is
Yeah.
not to
Well,
nullify it.
that's the difference. Whether it be a law we're talking about, or whether we're talking about like, for instance, a common law or an act of Parliament, there is a difference in the powers of what a jury can do.
Well, the Acts of Parliament have to comply with common law.
Hmm.
I mean, that is the point. You cannot have an Act of Parliament that does not comply with our common law. just lately, government have been putting up quite a few acts of parliament that defy common law, basically, and legally they're not law because they don't comply with the common law. But who do you take it to? Who do you take it to change it? Because now our politicians think they rule by Henry VIII's powers. But Henry VIII's powers were illegal when Henry VIII used them. He only got away with it because he was an arrogant bully.
Yeah, and he, again, force and the use of fear.
Yeah.
But there we go. This is the thing. I mean, people have got to see. This is why it always lands back at 61 because, as you say, it's like, look at what Parliament's doing. So what do we do about it? Unless the people take back control. And one way you do that, and it's the only way in we have to us, which is a lawful process. Any other way, you're going to be arguing whether you're acting illegally or unlawfully, because you've got the whole thing of domestic terrorism and stuff like that. But if you're acting within law, and i.e. you want to be in the right side of law, then the lawful process we have to go by, and the reason why it's there is the security clause. That's 61. And that is removing consent from the Crown and the Crown authorities and hand it over to the barons to then sort out what's going on. But until people do that, we are technically, whether people realise it or not, giving them consent for doing what they're doing.
Yeah. What people can do, and it's not strictly legal, is you attend your Member of Parliament's surgery. And you go in there, and there's a dozen of you go in there, and you explain to your Member of Parliament exactly what's going to happen to him if he doesn't do his job the way he is supposed to. You explain to him what's going to happen to him if he defrauds his expenses. And then you go away and you leave him. And he knows full well that he can't actually stop you coming back at any time to actually talk to him again about it. And how you talk to him about it when you go back is open to debate. But he's going to know. Now the only way you can do that.
Well, that is the but the thing is, that's the notification process. You notify him, and then you have to follow it up. In which way you do.
Basically, it has to happen to every single Member of Parliament at their surgery. So you need a movement across the country to go in and explain to the Member of Parliament what you are prepared to accept and what you are not prepared to accept, and what is going to happen to him if he tries something you're not prepared to accept.
I've tried getting this off the ground the same way, like with the whole MPs, and I've tried to do it with people getting involved in the courts again, but it's like it's getting there. It's slowly climbing, but we're basically, we need it, like you say, we need the people to start uniting now, but not just uniting behind the keyboard. We need people to start actually acting with us upon this, and you don't need a law degree to do any of this. You just need to be there
I wanted to form a shadow police force of retired officers who would look at things like treason offences, who would investigate them, who would collect a file, put a file together, proper police file, put it together, and then take it into their local police station and say, here's a police file. We want this man arrested and charged with this offence. And if the policeman says, get lost, we're not going to do that, then you jump over the council and you say, well, I'm putting myself back on duty. You're under arrest for obstructing me. And you go. Now, nobody's ever done that. Nobody knows what the courts would think about that. But I think if you've got a number of senior police officers in it, I think the courts would probably accept the fact that these are trained, experienced police officers who have taken the trouble to investigate the crime and put a file together. And I think the courts would side with the group of police officers. But
this is the thing about our Fabian arrest. The Metropolitan Police actually backed us and put the case to CPS after they'd been, and then they did investigate it. To be fair, they did really thoroughly investigate it, and basically they put it to CPS and stating evidence of crimes proven. So it was CPS where we're getting blocked, which we are about to sort of start again. I mean, it has been delayed quite a bit because there's certain things happening within CPS that we're waiting to see at the moment. But
police officers don't like the CPS. I arrested a man once for drink drive. And when I got him back to the Nick, he was currently serving a 5-year and a 10-year ban for drink drive. He was wanted on a warrant for failing to attend on another drink drive. And he had a 20-year history of flagrant disregard for the Road Traffic Act. So you can imagine my surprise, Nathan, when I get a billy do through from the CPS saying they're not sending it to court. So I phoned them up and I said, look, can you tell me why this is not going to court? They said, it's nothing to do with you. I said, I'm the arresting officer. It has absolutely everything to do with me. And they said, well, we're not going to tell you. I said, well, look, if it's anything to do with my paperwork, I need to know so I can correct it and don't do it again. And they said to me, we refuse to tell you. And I said, look, I have a system with my children. I ask them nicely to do something. If they still don't do it, I tell them to do it. If they still don't do it, I count to 3. If I get to 3, they get a smacked arse and sent to bed. I said, now I've already asked you very nicely to tell me. I'm shortly going to tell you to tell me. If I get to 3, I'm coming down there. I'm going to arrest whichever of your solicitors made that decision and charge them with perverting the course of justice. And they said, well, you can't do that with a CPS. I said, you're not above the law.
Exactly.
And they said, well, none of our other solicitors will process it. I said, in that case, I shall come back again. I shall find out which of your other solicitors is not processing the first solicitor, and I will arrest them for perverting the course of justice. And I will go on arresting you until every last one of you is in my cells. And then because I won't have a CPS to prosecute you, I'm going to have to prosecute you myself. And because I'm very good, and because I'm very good at what I do, you're all going to be found guilty and you're all going to go to prison. And when you come out of prison, you will find you've all been struck off as solicitors. Tell me now. They said, but you can't. I said, 1. They said, but we're the CPS. I said, 2. They said, hold on a minute. And then they came back and said, we've rethought about it and we're sending him to Hendon Magistrates Court. And the guy was sent to prison, which is where he ought to have been all along. The police officers can, if they want to, if they have the moral courage to do it, police officers can force the CPS into putting a case before the courts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm actually putting that in the because basically people want to go ahead with the event. So in the letters to the police and to CPS, I'm actually going to put in the facts that police can actually act against CPS if they fail to act upon this.
Yeah, and but the fact is, most police officers today do not have the moral courage to do what is right if it means sticking their head above the parapet.
This is the problem. People, we need people who are willing to actually stand tall.
Exactly.
I mean, I've been lucky enough that I've been meeting up with a few groups, speaking to a lot of groups, and we are starting to see the oranges of people who are actually willing to stand up and actually sort of do something. So it's looking good.
I say to people who are dissatisfied with their local police, I say what you need to do is if you've got a tenants association or a neighbourhood watch meeting, you invite along the local chief superintendent, the local area inspector, and your local home beat officer. What you do is you plan the meeting up front. You've got people there who will ask various questions. And what you do is you make it plain to the chief superintendent that unless things change and get better, for the people who live in that area. Unless the police force start doing the job they're actually paid to do, then you're coming after his job. Now, what's going to happen is he'll go back to the police station. He will then kick the inspector all around the police station because he's dropped him in the shit. And then the inspector will kick the local Homeby officer around the police station. The local Homeby officer will say to the officers on the relief, "Oh, I'm in trouble here, boys. I need some help. Can you please make sure you patrol on my beat more often than you have done?" And then you'll find you get more policemen on your beat. And therefore, you're going to find more criminals arrested on your beat. And therefore, you're going to find that you become a safer place to live.
See,
But
that's
you
another
have
thing.
to,
That's
but you
another
have
thing.
to, you have to
Sorry.
understand the system and how it works.
This is thing. That's another thing. I'm helping. Well, there's quite a big group of us now, and we're trying to get basically police back on the beat, like it used to be, where there's a proper patrol and there's a proper presence.
Well,
like, we are coming up against a brick wall, literally a brick wall.
We see police officers around where I live. They're in a police car. You don't see very many of them. Don't see them very often. But they're in a police car and they're driving down the road at 30, 40 mile an hour. They're just on ordinary patrol. The ideal speed for a police car that is on patrol is it should be going slow enough to be able to keep up with an officer walking a beat. Shouldn't go any faster than that, because that way they can see what is going on and they can deal with it. You're doing 30, 40 mile an hour down the road. You're not going to see a mugging that's going on, and you're going to drive right past it and be completely oblivious to the fact that it's happened right under your bloody nose, and so they need to have a complete mindset rechange in the police force as to how they do their job.
This is the thing, though. Is it the police that have to have a complete mindset? I mean, they do, but or again, do we come back to the training? Is it the education? Always comes down to education. How we educate these constables, how they're going to go out into the streets and act. So again, it comes down to education, and this is something that needs reform. And I don't just mean reform; I mean a complete.
Police officers ask
it was perfect once.
I got stopped in my car a while ago, and I got out of the car and walked back to the police van. The policeman got out of his van, and the first thing he said to me is, "Don't you respect me? Don't you respect me?" And I said, "If you don't mind my saying so, that is a damn fool question. I have never met you before in my life. How would I know?"
If he said, "Don't you respect me?" I'd say, "Okay, if that's what you want."
But I mean, he then was completely stuck for something to say. He was completely stuck for something to say. If I stopped the car, the first thing I would say to the driver is, "The reason I have stopped you is," right? And then we immediately know what we're talking about, don't we?
That is part of the procedure and due process. You approach, you basically identify, and then you announce the reason for the interruption.
I used to walk around with big pockets full of sweets. If I stopped the car being driven by a woman, women always tend to get into panic overdrive when they're stopped by a policeman. So the first thing I do when I walked up the car is put my hand in my pocket. I pull out a couple of sweets, and I say to the woman, "I'm going to have a sweet, sweetheart. Would you like one?" And immediately they know that it's not serious. Do you know what I mean? And they can relax. But I mean,
then we come back to the art of de-escalation, isn't it? And most constables, I don't think today rely on de-escalation.
Absolutely, and it's absolutely ridiculous that police officers are not properly trained to deal with things in a sensible manner. I mean, why would a police officer ask, "Don't you respect me?" Particularly if you've never ever met the bugger in your life.
He has an inferiority complex.
I mean, he obviously has a lack of faith in himself, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's what I said. He's clearly got an inferiority complex, so he's
Yeah,
he needs validation. That's what that
yeah,
is.
yeah. So
But this is the thing. I mean, so it, we've been doing this many years, and as I said, well, I mean, as we mentioned all the way back then, and that was a long time ago. British Constitution Group and all that. Not that's I don't know. I don't think. I mean, we used to say, but I don't think. I mean, did you ever imagine we'd be here to the point where we now have the general public talking about the Constitution, their rights,
well,
and what's lawful and which is illegal?
as you know, Nathan, I started this 16, 17 years ago now, and I was the first one to actually stand up on a stage and talk about constitutional law and treason. Um, and now everybody's talking about constitutional law and treason. Uh, the problem is the vast majority of them don't have the faintest idea what they are. Um, so, I mean, I I've got my book, which is out, which has been very well received.
That
I
is
don't know if
another
you,
thing as well, because I do have a lot of people that's interested in a copy of that book because I've
well,
recommended it to them, so they want to have a little butchers.
it's out of print now, but I've added to it because at the back end of it, I've put in an awful lot about common law, the right to bear arms, and all sorts of things. You know what I mean?
We
Um,
don't have the right to bear arms. We have a duty to be proficient.
well, we do have a right to bear arms under common law. As
Common
far as
law.
I'm concerned, all the firearms acts and everything else, they're all
Yeah,
illegal because they
yeah.
contravene common law.
You could
Um,
argue the right to bear arms under common law when you're talking castle doctrine, i.e., the right to protect
I mean,
one's own.
they're arresting all these soldiers and charging them in Northern Ireland. I came across a thing on the Bristol riots, and in there the court said that when a soldier is used to restore public order, he does so not as a soldier, but in his right as a private citizen, private subject, rather
Yeah,
than crown.
because it comes under the constitutional duty to keep peace, to
Yeah,
uphold the laws and
absolutely,
keep
yeah.
peace within the communities and protect the
And
realm
they
from
said that
any disharmony or
if
invasion, or I can't remember the
if
rest of
that
it.
soldier then if that soldier or anybody else actually shoots his gun and kills a rioter, that's a lawful killing. If he shoots and misses the rioter but hits somebody who's perfectly innocent at the back, that is an accidental death for which no penalty applies. Now, I wrote to the Provost Marshal, Brigadier General Neil at the time, who was the head of the military police, and said, look, this is what the law says. Can you please take this up and stop all these prosecutions of these soldiers? And to be fair to Brigadier General Neil, he did take it up. And I got a letter from the Army Legal Department which
Yeah.
said, we've changed the law since then. So I said to them, I wrote back to them, and I said, can you tell me which specific law says that in the event of a riot or a felonious assembly or the invasion of my country,
I'd
I
go as far as
cannot,
saying tumultuous assembly.
I cannot arm myself in order to put down that riot, felonious assembly, or to defend my country? Which law says I can't actually do that? And I'm still waiting for an answer because there isn't one. There isn't one.
No, so I'm not being saying that. I was thinking about this the other day. I would love it if you would do a show with me about the Bristol riots because that is, but I would say very relevant today.
Because the common law is quite specific. It says if you're aged between 12 and 60, you are required to arm yourself suitable to your station to put down riot, felonious assembly, or to defend this country from invasion. That's what the common law says. And
that is based on the duty to be proficient in arms to protect the realm.
The firearms acts are a series of knee-jerk reactions. The 1919 Firearms Act, because a lot of soldiers were coming back from Europe with souvenir firearms, and basically coming back to no job, nowhere to live, no job, and government was scared that the soldiers were going to rebel and come in and shoot them all. So they then put down restrictions on who could actually hold a firearm. If you take the law after Hungerford and what do you call it, up Dunblane in Scotland, that was a knee-jerk reaction that says that you can't own a handgun. But if you look at both the people, Ryan in Hungerford and the other guy up in Scotland, whose name I can't remember, they both had legally owned firearms, but they also had illegally owned firearms.
Exactly.
So, you know, if you cannot rely on that to discriminate against every legally owned owner of a firearm. You can't lump them all in the same breath, because Ryan and the other fella were illegally in possession of firearms anyway. So, you know,
This is the whole point. Yeah, but this is the whole
East
point
End of
about it
London,
being. Yeah, but this is the whole point
all the-
about it being in common law and the constitutional law. The fact that
Yeah.
we have a duty to be proficient in arms, because you
Yeah.
can't discriminate against somebody and say
No.
you can defend the realm and you can't, because therefore you're basically saying that somebody that doesn't have the right. So again, it's not just a right; it's a duty. So this is what
Well,
we need to
absolutely,
understand.
it's a duty.
They both back each other up because they are
Absolutely,
one and the
it's a
same.
duty. I mean, I'm over 60, but I've still got a longbow and I've still got a selection of swords, you know. So, but I'm over 60. But the fact of the matter is that when government do these things, like the Dangerous Dogs Act, not every pit bull is a dangerous dog. It's how the dogs are brought up. It's how they are managed from birth, as to whether a dog is dangerous. The dog that bites most people is the Labrador, and yet everybody sees a Labrador and they all think, "Oh, what a friendly, lovely dog that is." But it's still the dog that holds the record for biting most people, you know. But you know, I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous, you know.
But yes, again, back to the thing, because yeah, I've been sort of talking to people about your book a lot. I mean, you need to get on TikTok, really.
Well, what I need, Nathan, is I need a lot of money so that I can get the new version of my book with all the common law in it printed, and I don't have any money.
Best thing to do is get yourself on TikTok and like
Pardon?
get yourself on TikTok, get sort of like a bit of like publicity for it, and maybe do like a crowdfund or something.
Well, if somebody's got any money and they want to print my book, I'll send them a copy, and they can pay for it to be printed and they can distribute it. I'm
But is there
getting
any
a little
possible
bit.
way, people? Is there any possible way? Because you was talking about an email link or something like that, or a link so people can sort of
No,
download it.
if somebody wants my book, they send me an email, and they can leave their email address on Facebook, or they can email me, and I will attach the book and send it back to them. I don't have any problem with that at all.
What I'll do then is I'll try and sort it then so people can get your email so they can email you, and then
Yeah.
like I said, I think because there's a lot of people getting into sort of understand the Constitution, and sometimes when I and you talk, or you and I talk, a lot of people would get a bit turned away and turned off because of the depth of nature we're actually speaking. But your book kind of it gets people in a position where they can start to understand a lot, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, my book. I got a phone call one day from the Cambridge University Library. A Cambridge University professor of law had read my book. Don't know how the hell he got it, but he read it, and he got hold of the librarian, and he said, "You've got to hold this book on the shelf." And so the librarian phoned me and asked me if I objected to them cataloguing my book at Cambridge University, and I said no. So apparently it's catalogued. It's available at Cambridge University Library if anybody wants to get it out. But if I get it reprinted and the more modern version, I'll send them a version of that as well. But you know, basically, I am actually quite badly cash strapped at the moment. The government very kindly have stopped my pension credit. So I don't get my heating allowance that I used to have. I don't get the money they paid me for pension credit. So all I've got now is my old age pension. So, you know, much as I'd like to spend £1,000 on getting the book published, I don't have it to spend. So,
Exactly.
you know,
That's
so
what I'm saying. If you make a TikTok account, I'll get you on TikTok, and then we'll see me.
I
The more
don't
popular,
understand.
yeah, we'll help you. I'll help you.
I'm not, Nathan, I'm not computer literate at all. You know, you talk to me about TikTok, you might have been talking to me about fairies on Mars. You know, I'm just not computer literate at all. It takes me all my time to send an email. But I've got your email address, haven't I?
Yeah, you should have. We've emailed them.
Yeah, I've got your email address. I'll send you a copy of the book, Nathan.
No, I don't. And then because I'm not being funny, there is a lot of people that are sort of starting to try and understand the Constitution, and I think you're going to be doing people a massive favour with this, because it's saying that I've said this before, and the same with express law books. I think express law will do quite a good selection as well. But if you're going to start to once get into it and understand it, I've said sort of like the first book you should read is your book, because I've recommended that to many people of different I'd say different abilities, and everyone seems to get and understand it. So I think everyone should give it a go.
Yeah. Right.
And
Anyway,
it's well
Nathan,
written.
listen, I'm going to have to go, Nathan.
Yeah. As usual, in all ways, it's been an absolute honour and a pleasure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Well, definitely, we'll have to sort another one out. I want to talk about the Bristol Bites.
Okay. All right.
All right, that's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Good night,
Everyone in the
Nathan.
chat. Night, mate. Take care.
I will.
All right, bye, mate. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Night, everybody. Stay safe.